You seem to be the strongest, right? What do we do with these?
Eh? What do you mean?
It's a shame you came to our class. They don't like people like you here.
I'll show you nothing else, eh? What is it? Who are you?
I'm your system. By completing my tasks, you will receive my skills and will be able to deal with that crowd.
But why are you a dragon? Is the system material? She doesn't have a form and she's a computer, right?
One day, spiritual energy arose on the quiet blue star, and under the influence of this energy, terrible monsters evolved. In the heart of Tianhai, there appeared a Zhulan, a deity that illuminates the darkness, a dragon with a human face, and a Pangu monster, a mythical ancestor, the first man on Earth. People fought the monsters as best they could, using all their technologies. In the midst of another such battle, explosions appeared one after another, but the blows were weak to destroy the monsters, so the warriors fearfully thought that they were immortal. Traditional firearms are useless against such powerful monsters, so humans only rely on the awakened ones who come out to protect this world. It was the era of nirvana for the blue star. But fortunately, after just one generation of genetic evolution, the probability of births continued to grow steadily. Now, all young people who reach the age of 18 participate in an awakening ceremony, one of which was held at Tianhai No. 1 Senior High School, where superpowers are awakened within them. Many of them were worried that they would fail and would not be able to awaken. But one of the guys said that last time the percentage of those who awakened was 92%, which means that those who could not awaken are weaklings. One of these guys stood in the crowd and thought about his father, proudly realizing that his day of awakening had come. Today, he has the coolest ability, so everyone will be surprised. The guy's name was Lin Shu, and he was in his third year of high school No. 1, being in the first grade. Soon it was his turn, and the guy realized that it would soon be his turn. Right in front of him, one of the students had awakened the A-class abilities of fire and arcane magic. It was Zhao Wu, who was 18 years old. Teachers from different universities, such as Beiqin and Tianhai, immediately ran up to him, wanting Zhao Wu to go to their university. The awakening ceremony is the only chance in life where you can change your life based on your abilities. And while the teachers were arguing for Zhao Wu, the staff member called Lin Shu, saying that it was his turn and he needed to name his class, number, and name. Lin Shu said that he was a third year, first class 2023-0621, and then said his name. Hearing the guy's information, the crowd around him began to whisper. Some said that Lin Shu was the son of a traitor, and they said that his father had electrical abilities, and the boy could inherit this talent. But many still did not consider it a virtue, since his father was a traitor anyway. Listening to all this, Lin Shu understood that they were all right, since he was actually the son of that very traitor. It was 8 years ago, when his father was considered a hero, and everyone literally idolized him. He stood on the stage, catching the admiring glances of those around him and loud applause in his honor. At that time, Lin Shu was admired by many as the son of a hero who had very great prospects for the future. But Zhulong, the Pangu monster, attacked Tianhai, and everyone began to say that Lin Shu's father, seeing the impending danger, fled without a fight, thereby allowing the monsters to invade the city and cause huge losses among both the military and civilians. And the boy became the son of a traitor, who has now been despised by everyone for several years. And yet, he continued to study at this school because his father's blood flows in him, and he has the opportunity to get the coolest abilities. The assistant told the guy to walk forward and place his left hand on the panel, which Lin Shu obediently did. The system immediately recognized who he was, but did not show whether he had awakened abilities, the class of these abilities, and the level of their improvement. Lin Shu stared at the screen in surprise, and the assistant hesitated greatly, as if he felt awkward. Lin Shu turned to look at him and asked, "What does this mean?" The assistant replied that this meant that the boy had no superpowers. This news sent a shock through the boy's body. Everyone around started laughing and saying that Lin Shu probably thought that he would amaze everyone here with his awakened abilities, but this turned out to be empty fantasies, and he really did not inherit even a drop of his father's talent. In the end, Lin Shu couldn't stand it anymore when he heard some guy say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and that only such trash is born from traitors. Seeing Lin Shu's angry expression, Zhao Wu summoned fire, looked at the guy aggressively, and said that he didn't need to be so angry at the truth. Lin Shu calmly, but with a hint of confidence and anger in his voice, replied that he didn't care, but let Zhao Wu remember that his father was not a coward, and certainly not a traitor. At this point, the assistant's voice was heard, condemning the boys, ordering them not to swear, and even if Zhao Wu's abilities had awakened, they could expel the boy and cancel the results for violating the examination procedure. This alarmed Zhao Wu, and he fell silent. Then the man turned to Lin Shu and said that there would be no more lessons today, and the students who had not woken up could go home. The annoyed boy had to agree with the assistant's words. He turned around and walked towards the exit, under the mocking gaze of the students as they, one after another, awakened their various abilities: spiritual destruction, steel skin, ice, and so on. Lin Shu had no choice but to return to his first class. But when he entered, he saw several students who had destroyed his workplace. This greatly disturbed the boy, especially when he read what the students had written on the chair. On his briefcase, it was written that he was the son of a coward. All his sheets of paper and notebooks were covered with these shameful words and trampled under boots. The inscription on his chair said that they wished him to disappear from this world, and on his desk that he must pay for his father's misdeed. Clutching his pendant tightly in his fist, Lin Shu, remembering his father, silently asked him for forgiveness. Then one of the guys, Zhen Hu, the son of the Tianhai City Guard General, who was standing at the board, said ironically that Mr. Lin had returned empty-handed from the awakening ceremony again. Then Lin Shu saw a familiar badge on Zhen Hu's shirt, after which he looked in horror at the box, which was opened and thrown next to his desk. Lin Shu shouted loudly that this was his father's medal, after which he pounced on the guy, telling him to return it immediately. But Zhen Hu replied that if Lin Shu had inherited his cowardly father's electrical abilities, then he wasn't sure why he would suddenly be afraid that the boy would do something to him. The next second, Zhen Hu grabbed Lin Shu's hand and abruptly pulled it towards himself, after which the guy flew away to the side, and Zhen Hu said that it was a pity that the guy couldn't stand up for himself. Before Lin Shu could fall, his opponent gave him a strong kick, causing the boy to fly even further. Lin Shu slammed his face into the painted board, while the boys shouted after him that he hadn't awakened a single ability, meaning he was just a fool born from a traitor. One of them said that Lin Shu should answer for his father's crime and go to prison instead of continuing his studies. The second guy supported the first, and said that since Lin Shu has no ability, he is only disgracing their school in vain. Lin Shu himself listened to all this, trying to stand up, leaning against the wall. And then the guy answered Zhen Hu that their fathers, in any case, used to be comrades in arms, and he was just hitting a man when he was down. But Zhen Hu grabbed the boy by the hair and told him not to compare his father with his father. His father is the general of the city guard, and Lin Shu's father is a traitor. At this point, Zhen Hu noticed something interesting and stared at Lin Shu's medallion. He took it in his hand and said that he remembered that the boy's father had left this same little thing for him, a weakling. And since Lin Shu wears this thing so brazenly, then let him blame himself for the fact that she will figure it out now. After saying these words, Zhen Hu pulled the chain and broke it, tearing the pendant off the boy's neck. He shouted and ordered that this thing be returned to him. But Zhen Hu only pressed harder on the boy's head, who was unable to resist his strength, although he had been better at it before. Zhen Hu also noticed that Lin Shu had become weaker and remarked that the boy was only disgracing himself further. Then he added that Lin Shu had something he wanted to say. Namely, today, an ability and enormous power had awakened within him, and now, at the age of 18, he possessed the magic of the secret gate and the enormous power of Class A. After finally taking the pendant, Zhen Hu said to the helpless Lin Shu that of course he would break this thing now. He towered over the poor boy, clutching the pendant in his fist. At this moment, memories from childhood also surfaced in Lin Shu's mind, namely, the moment when his father gave him his pendant. He could not remember this moment in all details, since he was sleeping at that moment. But when he woke up, even as a child, Lin Shu realized that this pendant was from his father, and this was his last gift, so the boy cried. And now, he certainly had no intention of giving away the last thing he had left from his father before he left. But to Zhen Hu, this was just a trinket that could be used to tease a weakling and a coward. He then said, if Lin Shu wanted to keep this broken trinket, then he should kneel down and beg for it. The next second, Zhen Hu gripped the pendant even tighter, and red light poured out from his hands. The boy immediately looked up at Zhen Hu, as he really didn't like being called a coward. After that, he seemed to jump up and forward. Lin Shu pounced on his enemy, seeking to take back what was his. Lin Shu's actions, like his movements, were too strange to read and predict. So Zhen Hu was surprised when the boy bit his hand and said that he would be even more stubborn to achieve his goal. This behavior scared Zhen Hu, as it was very unexpected that Lin Shu clung to him like an animal, so the boy dropped the pendant. Lin Shu only noticed that the thing flew down. To prevent it from breaking, the guy himself fell to the floor and put his hands out to catch the pendant. As soon as he did this, the evil Zhen Hu lifted him up by his jacket and ordered the frightened guy to give him the pendant. But he replied that he would rather swallow the cola so that Zhen Hu wouldn't get it, and put the pendant in his mouth. This action was even more unexpected for the bully, who watched with a mixture of emotions on his face as Lin Shu swallowed the pendant. Smiling, Lin Shu said that he not only bites people, but also eats them. This further angered Zhen Hu, who threw the boy aside with great force. But he, rising again with difficulty, said that he was hated only because he was the son of Lin Longzun. Previously, because of this, they all feared him, were afraid of him, and moreover, wanted to win his favor. And now, because he is just Lin Longzun's son, they hate him, take out their anger on him, and do everything they can to humiliate him. They all said correctly that Lin Su was a fool who had not awakened a single ability, but since everyone thought of him as such, he had no intention of giving up. Gritting his teeth, the guy got up from the floor to prove that he was not a coward. And then Lin Su, with tears in his eyes, shouted that one day he would prove to everyone around him that his father was not a coward. The guy confidently added that his father did not run away from the battlefield. It was as if something inside him turned over, and it was as if an electric current ran through him. The power seemed to emanate from the medallion, which became its concentrate. It was as if he had cracked, releasing this power and giving it to Lin Shu. It was a very strange feeling that scared the guy at first. But then he felt that all this was not just like that. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of the boy, saying that it had successfully detected the host's blood and then began to bind itself to his genes. It was the Monster Lord system. Lin Shu couldn't understand how he got here, but then he remembered the moments of his childhood and his medallion. He remembered how Zhenhu tried to break him and threatened him, after which Lin Shu ate the medallion, breaking it into pieces. What the couple didn't realize was that Zhenhu wanted to humiliate him, but he failed. By a coincidence, that hooligan Zhenhu helped him activate that amber that was left to him by his father. The Monster Master system congratulated the new master on successfully binding to itself and provided a choice of one monster as a reward for starting. Looking at the panel, Lin Shu looked at the Fate monster in surprise and decided to select it to find out what it was. The front was filled with a multitude of panels with still unclear images of monsters. The first monster was the king of monsters named Kuilun. This monster Pangu lives on the shore of the Eastern Sea, on Mount Lubo, and has both sea and earth characteristics, radiates a radiance like the sun and moon, roars like thunder, and can easily penetrate everything that his eyes can see. The second was a tyrant monster named Jintian, who lives in the west, on Mount Yu. 200 million years ago, he descended from a blue star and disappeared after a decisive battle with the king of monsters. His hovering figure with outstretched wings is as hot as the sun, and people still gossip about him. The third was the monster queen Jiao Chun, who sleeps on Mount Pingfeng. The ancestor of the Hymenoptera order, according to legend, was the protector and shelter of all creatures in the natural realm. She had incredibly strong auxiliary abilities. And finally, the fourth monster is the wild monkey, the star destroyer Aohan, who lives in the west, on the lonely island of Jiyuan. He had a pair of strong and sturdy paws, and he possessed all destructive power, capable of destroying even the stars. Lin Shu looked at all these monsters from the Pangu era and thought that he only needed to choose. The system would automatically reincarnate into one of these monsters. But newly born Pangu monsters are just like babies. The owner will need patience to raise them. But Lin Shu thought that this system that gives out the Pangu monster reward at the beginning was quite generous. That Julin who destroyed Tianhai was actually Pangu's monster. If Lin Shu has this, he might become invincible, which sounds like a pipe dream. But the system interrupted the guy's thought and warned that the owner must choose quickly, because if he does not give an answer in the allotted time, it will be considered a refusal, so he had 1 minute left. But Lin Shu seemed to be in a panic, not knowing who he should choose. Looking at the attractive option, the Queen of Monsters, the guy realized that she was not right for him after all. Looking at the other monsters, he thought about it, and stopped through his gaze on the King of Monsters. Kuilun was just the kind of monster that could spew lightning, which suited the guy very well. Then he clenched his fist, remembering all the bullying he had to go through. He understood that now no one would say that he had not inherited his father's electrical abilities. Then Lin Shu proudly said that he chose Kuilun. The system approved his choice in the form of this monster of fate. But the guy's joy was short-lived, as a whirlpool of water seemed to form in front of him. It was as if she was pouring out from the system screen, which left Lin Shu stunned. A whole wave swallowed him up and seemed to begin to carry him away. Thus, it was as if he found himself in the depths of the sea, but he could breathe and understand what was happening. Then he saw that in front of him was a huge monster's eye, and a hoarse, loud voice calling him a stupid person said that not even 100 years would pass after the conquest of the Blue Star, and Lin Shu would become the ruler of the world. And when the true master of monsters arrives, the whole world will bow before the guy and fear him. Looking at the huge monster, Lin Shu thought that this was the oppression of the Pangu monster. Here the whirlpool swirled him again, carrying him away somewhere. It was as if he had fallen into the water from a great height, leaving behind a trail of water. As he fell, he noticed something very dangerous and scary below. These were the monster's huge green eyes and its big red mouth. But the guy didn't land in the water or in a huge mouth. After falling, he found himself on the head of the King of Monsters, which towered over the water, showing its enormous size. Lin Shu stared forward in surprise, trying to figure out what Kuilun's intentions were. He suddenly started to growl very loudly, which alarmed the guy. He screamed in surprise and fear, trying to maintain his balance on the Kuilun's head. But eventually he started falling down and found himself inside some strange funnel. He felt so dizzy that he closed his eyes and then opened them. The same guys who bullied him were standing in front of him. Lin Su thought with disappointment that what happened to him was just a dream. But he saw a system notification that he was able to open himself. The inscription said that he had received one egg. It contained a monster that was supposed to make the boy a monster lord. Lin Shu scratched his head and thought that the system gave him the dragon egg at such an important moment, which could mean that this Pangu monster was invincible. Then the guy quickly stood up and shouted to the others not to come near him, and then turned to the system and asked when this egg would hatch. When Lin Shu realized that he had to wait for the monster to hatch, it was a great disappointment to him. The guys in the class said that Lin Shu was a big talker, and he didn't even think that they would leave him alone because he swallowed the pendant. The boys decided to take off Lin Shu's pants to make the guy even more angry. Holding the guy and grabbing his pants, Zhenhu said that getting the pendant out would not be difficult for him. Such aggression and action surprised even Lin Shu, who could not believe that this could be done to people. He could of course say that the pendant broke in his stomach, but it had definitely changed already, and he had to wait until the egg hatched. But if he said that, he would be treated like a mother hen, and that was also not good. Well, suddenly, at the most crucial moment, someone shouted at the guys to stop. Everyone suddenly turned around and noticed a strange shadow. It was the girl who said that the bullies had seriously violated the school rules with their behavior, so as a student at that school, she ordered them to let their classmate go, give him his books, and get ready to receive punishment. What surprised Lin Shu the most was that she was an ordinary student, and therefore his classmate. But Zhenghu grinned and said that the girl was too old for a disciple, so it was none of her business, and then ordered her to be a good girl, turn away, and walk away. But the girl replied that she was on duty, and the boys had already violated points 8, 9 of the second article and point 13 of the third article of the school regulations. But before the girl could even finish speaking, Zhenhu turned around and pounced on her, taking the pen from her. Then the guy said that the girl was impudent, so he would let her go, but if she didn't leave on her own, she would never leave the class again. Zhenhu twirled the pen in his hands while the girl watched him carefully. Suddenly, the pen began to move and slipped out of Zhenhu's hands. It ended up right in the guy's throat, who guessed that it was a fountain pen and that the girl had done it with the help of magic. She immediately warned that if the guy hurt his classmate, it would become a public matter. Hearing this, Lin Shu was surprised because he didn't expect that this girl had access to their affairs. Zhenhu chuckled again and said that he couldn't even imagine that the girl was awakened. But you can't scare him with this because everyone in this class has already woken up and is against her. Zhenhu's strength is rated as A level, meaning he is very strong. But the girl behaved very calmly and, raising her hand, said that it meant nothing to her. An enraged Zhenhu advised her to mind her own business and not even think about talking to this loser. Lin Shu decided to intervene because he felt it was unfair for Zhenhu and a bunch of awakened to threaten one little girl. But as soon as the guy spoke up, they immediately tried to shut him up by hitting him in the face. Lin Shu fell down, and Zhenhu added that he would eliminate the unawakened trash without a bunch of awakened ones. Then he said that, of course, he would deal with this awakened stranger, who was also a snob. The girl did not like this nickname, but she was a little scared. Then she decided to tell what the awakened meant. In the time of Nirvana, the awakened were the last hopes of humanity against the monsters. So now she will not allow all sorts of fools to walk around and boast about these symbols. Hearing the trepidation and the notes of justice in the girl's voice, Lin Shu realized that she herself had once fought. But it was still strange and dangerous to engage in combat with multiple opponents. But suddenly a question arose in the boy's head. Wasn't this what his father felt when he fought with monsters in the secret realm? His thoughts were interrupted literally by the snap of the girl's fingers. After that, the school mop flew towards the surprised Lin Shu and got under his clothes, after which the mop flew up together with the guy hanging on it, scattering all the hooligans around. Lin Shu found this behavior to be aggressive and already thought that the girl was mistaken, since this was a very strange way of defending herself. But then the tip of the mop crashed into the wall, breaking it. Lin Shu felt like he was nailed to the wall and was hanging in midair, not understanding why the girl was attacking him. But she replied that she did it so that the guy would just get out of her way, since it was dangerous here. Zhenhu shouted to his friends to attack, wanting the girl to experience their cool superpowers. But she didn't even move, and lightning sparkled around her. Then she quietly said that such a bunch of newly awakened ones had not yet had good lessons. Suddenly, the things lying on the tables began to vibrate. And then they all, including phones and school supplies, flew towards the hooligans. The guys were very scared when they saw that the girl could control metals, because they had once heard about this rare power. And the girl at this time, holding all the metal objects above herself, said that she would teach all these fools what she really means by awakened. Seeing this, Zhenhu was very scared and didn't know what to do. All the metal objects that were in this room were pointed at him, and they were quite sharp. The girl told him not to move, otherwise he might get scratched. Looking at this fight, Lin Shu was surprised that the girl had dealt with Zhenhu in an instant. From the looks of it, she was very strong. Jae-woon, hiding under the desk, shouted to his friend that he remembered something about her, and also added that it was better not to joke with this girl. In fact, she was the student council chairwoman, Su-ling Yu. She had undergone an awakening ceremony at the age of 14, gaining the power of magnetism of the A-class arcane magic. After learning the girl's name, Jin-Hoo felt annoyed that he wouldn't be able to deal with that fool Lin Shu and carry out his little evil plan. He won't be able to do this because he met this strong girl who said that if she uses her powers just a little bit, the guy will be torn to pieces in an instant, but if he doesn't want that, then he should give up immediately. Currently, Su-ling Yu was 17 years old and was at the initial stage of the cultivation limit, clarity of spirit, which meant that she was an entire limit higher than Jin-Hoo, who was only at the stage of dried blood. But Jin-Hoo couldn't afford to lose. The truth is that his father is Jen-Chai Liang, who is definitely not the last person in this city. But then the metal objects came even closer to the guy. One of them, namely a metal ruler, was able to cause minor damage to the guy. This made Jin-Hoo very angry because the girl was able to scratch him, which meant that it was not significant, but she did injure him. Lin Yu said that Jin-Hoo had better give up childish thinking and remember his father. The superpowers of an awakened person are no guarantee of safety. One spark, and there will be a fire, and maybe even an explosion. But the person the girl is competing with, and whose abilities have awakened, is precisely Jin-Hoo. So even if her hand trembles and she destroys this guy, General Jen will not even ask for reasons and explanations. And then Jin-Hoo realized that he was in a hopeless situation and decided to give up. But these words seemed not to be enough for the girl. Then, towering over Jin-Hoo, she asked again if the boy understood the meaning of the word awakened, and then she added that she hoped the bully would remember this lesson, since the frivolity of the awakened one could lead him to bad consequences and even to leaving this world. But the honor of the awakened always goes to God, both with courage on his deathbed and the determination to sacrifice himself. After that, the girl focused on the badge that was attached to Jin-Hoo's shirt, after which he began to twitch. After that, Lin Yu seemed to pull him towards her using her power. Thus, the badge quickly ended up in her hand. Looking at his torn shirt, Jin-Hoo was furious, but his eyes still showed fear of Su-ling Yu. But the girl said that if Jin-Hoo understood her, then let him give the textbooks to his classmate, and tomorrow morning in the principal's office, he will receive his punishment. The girl's gaze was so determined and even scary that Jin-Hoo wanted only one thing at that moment, to run away. Jin-Hoo glanced angrily at Lin Shu for the last time before disappearing, and the guy himself noted that Su-ling Yu had only needed less than 3 minutes to deal with the entire gang. This girl really seemed like a real hero to him. Although Lin Shu couldn't stand Jin-Hoo, he wasn't at all happy about the pitiful appearance of his enemy, since it wasn't he who had killed him. At that moment, he realized that the awakened Jin-Hoo had much more strength. But Su-ling Yu can still easily destroy him, although he is only one level above the guy. But the difference in strength between them is like heaven and earth. Looking at Su-ling Yu, Lin Shu thought that he wanted to solve the mystery of his father's disappearance by proving that he did not flee from the battlefield. But he doesn't know how often he will encounter awakened ones whose strength is enormous along the way. And will he be able to deal with them? While the boy was thinking about this, Su-ling Yu looked at him intently and asked, "Could this really be that Lin Shu?" The guy looked at the girl in fear and thought that she was one of those who also despised him. Well, here the place on the mop that was in contact with the guy's clothes started to sparkle, after which the mop flew to the side, freeing Lin Shu, who fell to the floor. Lin Longzong immediately stood before him, staring straight at the boy. Her green eyes were full of seriousness, as if she was looking at Lin Shu and solving a math problem. The guy himself didn't even dare to look her in the eyes, lowering them lower. The girl's eyes were suddenly drawn to the guy's funny underwear, which had bananas drawn on it and were still visible because the hooligans were trying to pull his pants off. This made Su-ling Yu a little embarrassed, but she tried not to show it. Then she suddenly told Lin Shu not to bring things unrelated to school anymore, and then returned his badge to him. The guy started making excuses and saying that the hooligans simply snatched it out of his hands. But Su-ling Yu didn't listen to him and started to leave, so Lin Shu only managed to thank her for her help. Already standing at the door, the girl said that according to the schedule, after lunch, all the students go home, so the guy should do the same. Those who are not awakened had better learn quickly that they cannot have anything to do with those who are awakened, since there is a great gulf between them and those who are awakened. Lin Shu, looking at Lin Yu almost with admiration, understood that she was speaking correctly. Now he can't catch up with the awakened ones with his usual powers. At this point, he could only rely on his father's system and suspension. Since he failed to awaken and confront the monsters directly, then he will become an awakened monster lord. These thoughts completely took over the boy, but soon night fell, and there were still students in the first high school of Tianhai City. It was Jin-Hoo and his ill-disposed group who were given the punishment of cleaning the classroom, which seemed endless to them. While washing the board, Zhao noticed that it was already almost 8:30, and they weren't even planning on finishing yet. The gang members asked the boss why they should do this at all, when they could have entrusted this horror to that scumbag named Lin Shu, especially since some of the guys start preparatory courses at 9. But Zhenhu interrupted their indignation and replied that if he said so, then it must be done, so it is better to work harder than to talk. In fact, Zhenhu was more afraid of running into Su Ling Yu again. And while the hooligans were suffering from the long cleaning, at the same time Lin Shu was busy with more important matters. Night had enveloped the entire area, but the light was on in the boys' room. He spent the whole day searching for information, but there was no progress, which made him very angry. There is very little information directly related to Pangu monsters, although it is understandable. After all, up until now, only one such monster has appeared in this world, the light dragon Zhulong. At the same time, Lin Shu managed to clearly sense the incomparable power hidden within the Qilin, so he must find a way to incubate the Qilin egg. But then a new notification popped up in the system. This was the first system task that involved incubating a Qilin monster in the shortest possible time. Lin Shu, seeing this, was very happy and thought that this notice should have surfaced much earlier so that he himself would not suffer. But the system warned that it was operating on the energy of the Qilin, the host monster. At the moment, the Qilin is still in the incubation period, and the system is operating in energy-saving mode and is activated only in especially important cases. That's why the system asked the owner to incubate his pet as soon as possible. But Lin Shu's problem is that he has already dug through all the sources and still hasn't found how to incubate the Pangu monster. The system said that this was an expected result, since only a measly 5 million years had passed since the evolution of humanity, while the lifespan of the weakest Pangu monster was about 100 million years, and their incubation period was 5 to 6 million years. Hearing this information, Lin Shu was surprised and indignant, because he can't wait 5 to 6 million years. Nothing will hatch for sure. The system responded that, naturally, in the case of natural incubation, this would be impossible, however, since this system is called the Monster Master System. It has methods for artificial incubation. The guy became interested and asked what these methods were, to which the system replied that one of them was the monster's crystal core. Absorbing spiritual energy ensures the growth and survival of monsters and also accelerates their birth. The absorbed spiritual energy is concentrated in the crystal core, and the reason for the slow growth and development of Pangu beasts is because the spiritual energy content on Earth is low. Therefore, the incubation process can be accelerated by using the spiritual energy from the crystal core. Straining his head, the guy irritably decided to ask again, was it really true that the system didn't mean the internal elixirs of the Yao Guai? But even if so, in any case, the guy had a question: where to find such a core? The system responded that there was no need to worry about this, since the system had already detected the presence of the monster's crystal core in the carrier's house. This news made Lin Shu overjoyed, and he thought that it was most likely his mother who was hiding such an important thing from him. But it was about that very icon that the system told us was created from the crystal core of a megaton monster and contained enough spiritual energy to complete the monster's incubation period. Lin Shu realized that all of this was his father's medal, which he left behind when he passed away forever. The boy immediately remembered how, after his father disappeared, they began to tease him as the son of a coward and a traitor. But despite this, the boy never parted with his father's medal and vowed to himself to one day clear his name. But today, if Su Ling Yu hadn't intervened, he would never have been able to get that medal back. At the moment, the guy is not only unable to restore his father's reputation, but he is not even able to do the most basic things, namely, to protect his medal, which fortunately, he still holds in his hand. Lin Shu then asked the system to tell him how to speed up the incubation process. The system replied that it was currently impossible to contain monsters in the host space, so the first step was to objectify the Qilin egg. This information interested the guy, and he decided to clarify what this objectification meant. Then the system seemed to turn into something resembling a scroll. At that very second, a laser appeared from it, which was directed at the wall and highlighted the drawing drawn on it. After that, the deed was done, and now the carrier could directly insert the monster's crystal core into the Qilin's egg. Lin Shu was very surprised because he had drawn this picture on the wall when he was not even 7 years old. But the system didn't respond and just hung in the air. Then the boy took the key in the form of his father's medal and brought it to the picture highlighted by the system. The closer he brought the medal, the hotter it became. Eventually, she seemed to stick to the wall and began to melt, disappearing. The guy was surprised to note that the wall, or rather the drawing on it, seemed to have absorbed the metal. All that was left of her was something liquid, molten metal, which continued to be absorbed. The wall began to make a strange cracking sound, and Lin Shu decided to move away from it. At this time, the cracks on the wall began to increase in the place where the drawing was, as if it was splitting like an eggshell. Lin Shu walked up to the wall and placed his hand on the cracks. After this, the wall began to crack at the seams, cracking more and more. Eventually it fell apart, creating large clouds of dust. Lin Shu immediately jumped away from the wall so that the bricks and stones could not hit him, after which the guy found himself on the floor and staring at the wall. But she was no longer there, and there was something amazing and frightening. In front of Lin Shu stood a real, relatively small dragon. It came out of the wall and headed towards the boy, who realized that it was Pangu's beast. According to the system, it was a jeweler stage Quilun that could be developed. Its bloodline was at the tyrant level, height 0.69 meters, weight 380 kilograms, and various attack methods, ramming, biting, tail slashing, and the initial ability was devouring. Seeing this little monster, Lin Shu angrily said that the system had deceived him, and what he was seeing in reality now was very different from what it had promised him. But the system seemed to change the subject and congratulated the carrier on completing the first task, for which he received a reward that must be accepted. It was a reward called taming, which said that if you touched the monster's lower jaw, the bearer could lure the monster to his side. With feigned joy, the boy asked why the system hadn't told him about this before. But the system replied that this ability only worked on targets whose level did not exceed the level of the carrier's fate monster. Then Lin Shu said with disappointment that he had guessed that he couldn't do much anyway, and even the Pangu monster egg that he got at the moment of danger, he had to incubate himself. Now he had the ability to incubate and collect monsters, but to use them, they needed to be no bigger than that little one who had bitten Lin Shu's pant leg. Then the guy pushed the monster away from him and told him not to touch his pants. But this did not calm the little dragon, and he began to run around his master. And then the monster ran to the place near the broken wall. After which, to Lin Shu's surprise, he began to eat the shell from which he hatched. But then the guy remembered that he had once read that reptiles have a habit of eating their own eggshells to restore and increase calcium in the body. The little dragon continued to devour the shell of his egg with great appetite. As he approached the Quilun Wu, that he didn't have the impression that this little thing could be relied upon. He could only hope that the system wouldn't say that it would take 5 million years to grow this monster. Here the Quilun's cheeks puffed out as if he was about to spit out everything he had eaten. The guy was scared, thinking that the monster had choked, and told him to come to his senses quickly, since the guy, by the way, had given away something that belonged to his dad because of him. But the system notification that suddenly appeared said that the Quilun had successfully completed the shell devour and gained 5 evolution points, and the more the monster continued to eat, the faster its points grew. They grew with each passing second, so much so that Lin Shu was even scared, thinking that the system had caught a virus, giving him so many notifications. Eventually, the Quilun reached 200 evolution points, after which a bright light appeared around it, which meant that the monster was growing. A moment later, the now quite grown Quilun accidentally crushed its owner by falling on him. Now its height was 1.28 meters, and its weight was 960 kilograms. Surprised and not understanding what to do, the guy asked the system what was happening and why this Quilun had grown so quickly and strongly. The system responded with displeasure that she had already said this, and that she should have listened to her, especially since the properties panel indicated that the Quilun's initial ability was devouring. Lin Shu realized that this ability allowed the monster to grow at such a fast rate, and now he was no longer very happy that he had chosen this particular monster. At this time, the monster seemed to have no intention of getting up from its crushed, dissatisfied owner, who was whining that his lower back was about to break. Then the door handle to the guy's room started to twitch violently. Lin Shu realized with horror that his mother had returned. Entering the room, the slightly plump woman asked what her son was doing and added that she had received a call from school informing her that Lin Shu had gotten into a fight with his classmates again. But then the calm gaze of the sweet woman fell on the monster Quilun. Only at that moment did she realize that there was a dragon in front of her, and she became incredibly scared, starting to scream and jumping to the side. Lin Shu immediately went to his mother to help her up, and said that there was no need to be afraid of the monster, since the boy had just tied this Quilun to his fate. Then he turned to the monster and asked him to come and say hello to his mother. Quilun smiled as best he could, baring his fangs. Mom was shocked and didn't know what to answer while Lin Shu tried to explain everything to her. And while the mother just sank to the floor, Lin Shu ran up to the system and asked if she could stuff the Quilun into the monster lord's space for now, but she replied that it was currently unable to accommodate a whole monster. Then the boy pushed the monster towards the window, thinking that there was nothing left to do but take him away, and then calmly explain everything to his mother. Seeing a glass window with shutters, the Quilun thought that it was a cage and that he was being held captive. That's why he started to show aggression and broke the glass with his paws. But the wooden shutters were still in place, which the monster didn't like very much. So he grabbed them and tore them out, breaking the window completely. Lin Shu was very unhappy and angry, not understanding why the monster was doing this, but stopping it would be even more difficult. The sound of broken glass made neighbors look into the door, wanting to find out what had happened in this apartment that even the alarm went off. But Lin Shu had no time for the neighbors, as he understood that they should not see the Quilun, so he pushed the monster through the window, saying that it was time to leave. Covering himself with his banana-printed blanket, the boy apologized to his mother as he said goodbye, even though she didn't hear it. but at the same time, the guy promised that when he returned, he would definitely explain everything. After that, he jumped out the window and landed on the Quilun, flying away with it into the night and new trials, while they shouted insults at him and that he had done something wrong again. The boy's mother looked out the window and started yelling at him to come back. But he and the Quilun were already sitting in the bushes and hiding. The guy thought with annoyance that his mother had quickly come to her senses, which was, in principle, in her character. But in any case, he had to wait a while before returning, so that she could cool off. Looking at the monster covered with a blanket, Lin Shu thought that according to the system, it was continuously evolving. Then the system appeared and responded so abruptly that Lin Shu was frightened by this suddenness and was surprised, since when did it work so quickly and smoothly? And the system, in turn, reported that by receiving spiritual energy through devouring, the Quilun can continuously grow and develop and will soon be able to understand the owner. The disappointed guy asked tiredly, was that really the only reason the system had popped up? The system was amazed by the carrier's insight and replied that it wanted to give him advice because after the successful incubation of the Quilun, an important system function was activated, the monster radar. Lin Shu and his Quilun stared at the system in silence, not understanding what it meant. And then the guy said with displeasure that he would no longer trust the system since it gave him a monster that he had to hatch himself and then gave him an ability that was useless. So let him tell you about this radar with all the nuances now. The system responded that the monster radar would help the wearer identify sources of spiritual energy in the surrounding area, as well as the degree of their concentration. This function would help the Quilun greatly facilitate its strengthening through devouring. Lin Shu thought that this was really convenient, and then found the brightest dot in the center of the map, which represented the Quilun, and the dots behind the Quilun were the shells that he had eaten recently. The system responded that this was indeed the case, and the size of the dots reflected the degree of spiritual energy content of the objects. Looking at the map again, the guy noticed something curious, namely, the point where there is much more energy than in an eggshell. This point was approximately the same size as the Quilun itself. It was all like a game of Snake, which finds dots and devours them, becoming bigger, and in the case of the Quilun, it gets more experience. All the monster thought about was how to eat tasty and a lot, gaining more energy. Lin Shu was not surprised, as he had initially realized that the Quilun was a real glutton. However, gluttony plus devouring sound absolute power for both the monster and Lin Shu. Then the guy climbed on top of the monster and covered it with a blanket he had taken with him. At first the Quilun didn't like it, but the guy told him not to spin around, because that was the only way they could go unnoticed. And now they were both in full combat readiness to go out and find the source of energy. Quilun moved forward and began to run very quickly, covering the distance. The guy thought all this time that he was a real genius, since he came up with the idea of hiding the Quilun in this way. Taking one last look at the radar, the guy realized that they were already there. There was a huge multi-story building in front of them, which meant they had to climb up. But this place didn't look like a place where monsters usually roam. It looked more like a huge and beautiful residential complex. Besides, this house had quite a strong and serious one. Lin Shu wondered if they would be allowed through, but suddenly the monster growled softly, as if it wanted to say that it knew what to do. The guy told him not to make unnecessary noise, but the Quilun was already preparing to jump, after which the monster jumped so high that the guy was frightened by the surprise. Then the Quilun jumped onto the building and, clinging to it with its claws, began to climb up. Lin Shu noticed that the building remained basically as expected from earthquake-resistant buildings built after the invasion of Julun. Thus, the monster and its owner gradually climbed higher and higher along the balconies of the house. They almost reached the roof and noticed a small clothes dryer. Quilun indicated that they were there, but the guy couldn't believe that a monster lived on the roof of a residential building. What was even stranger was that there were women's things in the dryer, which means that, no matter how you look at it, they have stumbled upon a woman's bedroom. Lin Shu had already imagined the newspaper headlines that said that he, having failed to awaken, being the son of a traitor, despaired of himself and entered the girl's bedroom at night with a monster. The guy already thought that the system had made a mistake again and had shown him the wrong place, but the monster sniffed and smelled the scent they had come here for. It was the real spiritual energy that attracted the Quilun. Sensing her, he rushed towards where she was. Lin Shu tried to stop him, as he was intruding into someone else's home, but it was useless. I tried to stop the Quilun. The guy grabbed it by the tail, but couldn't stay on his feet and fell. Lin Shu raised his head and saw the emblem of the Da Yi Guild. It was very familiar to him. On the blue star, the vast majority of spiritual energy is concentrated inside other dimensions called secret realms. Under the influence of spiritual energy, various valuable items and bloodthirsty monsters appear in the secret realms. Vast improvement and scientific research for awakened people, these places are exceptional. Therefore, all countries of the world exercise strict control over the secret kingdoms located on their territories, and the emblem of the Da Yi Guild is a pass to the secret kingdom of China, and each emblem has a unique appearance. Taking the emblem pendant in his hands, Lin Shu stared at it curiously, just like his pet. Having drawn parallels, the guy realized that in this case, this emblem must belong to a girl he already knew. Her strength was already visible behind the shower doors, so it immediately became clear who she was. Lin Shu felt embarrassed and scared when he realized the situation he was in. This emblem belonged to none other than Su Ling Yu, who saved him from the bullies. The hysterical guy grabbed his head and began to blame the system for everything, since it had dragged him here of all places, to this girl who, with or without the monster, would cut him into sashimi. Hearing the word for food, the monster licked his lips. And Lin Shu angrily bet on the system, which would not feed with bread, but only let him do another dirty trick on his master. At this point, the sound of running water stopped, meaning that Lin Yu had turned off the water in the shower. Wrapped in a towel, she asked who was in her house. The guy had already imagined how this girl easily dealt with his monster and prepared a delicious dinner out of it. The doors began to open quietly, and then a girl looked out. Lin Yu looked beautiful, fresh, and confident, trying to understand what was going on in her house. Before that, she simply calmly took a shower late at night and thought about her own things, namely, the past day. Lin Yu decided that she had gone too far today, so the unawakened, for their own good, needed to quickly understand that they shouldn't mess with the awakened. Then she remembered the lost Lin Shu's face and thought that it was all for his own good, because he appeared in such a pitiful form, but acted like the son of a hero, and it seemed that he overestimated his strength. Lin Yu's last thought was that she shouldn't have the same hopes for this guy that she had thought about from the beginning. And only after that she heard the sound of the medallion falling. She immediately became alert and asked who was there, but she heard nothing in response. So she carefully opened the door and walked out, wrapped in a towel. But all she saw was an open window and a blanket with banana pictures disappearing into it. The monster managed to grab its owner by the clothes just in time and carry him away, while he screamed that this was not his 4-story building, but a 40-story one, so it was reckless to jump out so quickly. But the monster could no longer be stopped, and they began to fall down from the 40th floor. The fall was hard enough to crack the ground and grass, creating a lot of dust. Quilin lay down on the ground and began to think that he was very hungry, while his owner was in shock that he was simply able to survive. At this point, the system notification congratulated the carrier on successfully finding the source of spiritual energy, and then activated the second task. Lin Shu was unbearably angry at the system and shouted, asking why the dot on the monster radar was a human. The system responded that the radar detects sources of spiritual energy and their concentration levels, which does not include determining the type of objects. In addition, the awakened, like the monsters, were the result of the resurgence of spiritual energy on the blue star. Therefore, it is logical that monsters and awakened ones contain identical spiritual energy. But Lin Shu shouted that it is only logical for the system, to which she replied that the reward for completing the second task is worth the guy's attention. The system changed the topic and said that the reward would be a systemic power projection ability, but Lin Shu no longer believed it, as it had let him down many times, but there was something about this reward that still interested him. Then the system responded that this ability allows one to merge with the projection of a monster located in the carrier's space and receive 30% of all its attributes for a certain time. The system also added that the carrier can read the description of the ability only after receiving it, but in order to motivate the carrier, the system, as an exception, violated the established order. After analyzing all of the above, Lin Shu was not very inspired by the possibility of obtaining 30% of the attributes of his lazy and gluttonous monster. Well, it dawned on the couple that the size of the dot on the radar that indicated monsters was the same as Lin Yu's, which meant that if he received 30% of the monster's strength, he would reach the strength of the mid-stage blood-thickening stage. This thought greatly inspired Lin Shu, who realized that he needed to obtain this ability. While the boy was happy that he would soon gain great strength, his pet thought only about food. He showed his master with annoyance that he had only eaten twice. Moreover, he was not allowed to do this. He did not finish the eggshell because he was pushed towards the window. When the monster wanted to eat the source of spiritual energy, its owner was afraid that the owner of this source would make a stew out of his pet. But Lin Shu tried to calm the Quilin down, saying that now was not the time to enter the count. Moreover, it is better to rely on yourself than to rely on others. But in this case, he grabbed something for the monster who was looking at him with curious eyes. This was the very emblem of the Dai Guild, a pass to the secret kingdoms of China. After some time, the guy and the monster came to the place where they passed through the identification system. It was the secret kingdom A86, which was the closest. Showing the monster the medallion, Lin Shu said that with this emblem he could lead him to a secret realm where he could feast to his heart's content. There was plenty of spiritual energy within the secret realm. Looking around, the guy noticed that it was very good that this secret kingdom only belonged to the E rank, which meant that the security measures here were so-so and there weren't even any guards. Thus, the guy with the Quilun was able to easily pass through the entrance. Looking around, the guy assumed that there used to be a construction site here, which was closed down when the passage to the secret kingdom opened. Here the monster learned something strange and stared forward. Later, the guy noticed something strange too, especially after the monster pointed it out directly. There was a blue light ahead, like a portal, which, apparently, was the passage to the secret kingdom. Lin Shu had never seen anything like this before, so he was surprised. He then hesitantly told the monster that it was time for them to go in. He immediately thought about his father, and that the boy, like him, would now visit the secret kingdom. The friends decided not to delay and headed straight to the portal. The moment they entered the portal, Lin Shu remembered that the test showed that he did not have awakened abilities. Let him now go into complete obscurity. And even though he lost all the things that were left behind by his father, but now he has taken the first step to change everything. Finally, the monster stepped onto solid ground. The secret kingdom was like Jurassic Park, with endless jungles, mountains, and strange animals inside. Even though this kingdom was of a lower rank, it was still very different from the outside world. The animals here were very strange and had unusual colors and shapes. Suddenly, seeing a large dragonfly, if one could call this huge insect that, the Quilin decided to chase after it, forgetting about its owner, who fell painfully to the ground. But the monster was a little clumsy and did not notice the stone in front of him, over which he tripped, after which he fell to the ground with a crash which looked very funny. But not for Lin Shu, who annoyedly said that the Quilin should behave more adequately, since they were, after all, in a secret kingdom. Noticing the seriousness of the owner, the monster suddenly stood up and took a serious pose, after which he began to do something strange, blowing air into himself through his nostrils. And then, taking a deep breath, the Quilin exhaled, letting out a very loud cry. The guy covered his ears and said that he shouldn't have yelled so loudly, but his pet looked at his owner and pointed behind him. Turning around, Lin Shu saw a huge monster that looked like a bear with a long tongue and was horrified. At first he couldn't even move because he was shocked by the size of this monster. But then the system notification showed that as long as the system exists, its carrier has nothing to fear. Hugging the system, the guy happily said that, after all, in decisive moments one can count on it and let it quickly tell him what is the best course of action. The system responded that there was no monster in front of them, but just an ordinary creature from the prehistoric period, which, by the way, already wanted to hit the guy with a huge paw. Lin Shu barely managed to lick it, not believing that it was just an ordinary creature, since its size was too huge. Turning around, the guy noticed that the huge bear had hit a rotten tree. From this blow, the tree broke in half, which frightened the guy even more, as he was convinced that this creature had enormous strength. Lin Shu immediately thought that if the bear had hit him with its paw, he would have already turned into a cutlet. Then the boy shouted that this was no ordinary creature, as if he had not reacted, he would have said goodbye to his life. But the system only advised the carrier to open an illustrated guide to monsters. When the world changed, some of the prehistoric creatures accidentally entered the secret realms, thereby gaining the opportunity to survive. After staying in the secret realm for a long time, they also absorbed a small amount of spiritual energy. The important thing is that compared to monsters, they are very weak. Looking at the radar, Lin Shu realized that the system was right because the radar dot from this bear is not even bigger than the shell of a Quilin egg. Lin Shu decided that in this case, there was no need for him to stand on ceremony, and considering that this was his first trip to the secret realm, this creature was perfect for getting his hands dirty. But he himself was not going to fight, as many might think, but simply told his Quilin to attack and pointed at the creature. The huge bear stared at the guy as if he was a complete fool, since the monster did not attack him. This situation even interested the bear, so he stood there in bewilderment. Lin Shu was still trying to look serious and not lose face, so as not to provoke the monster. The guy then turned to the system and asked where his dragon was, because according to the radar, it should be right here. The system replied that it was difficult to find its location, because the Quilin was a creature with its own will. But the monster opposite didn't care, and he attacked the guy. He grabbed his head in panic and realized that if his pet did not return, it would be the end for him. But then red lightning appeared from afar, and this meant only one thing. Quilong returned. Well, his strength seemed to have increased, as did he himself. Thus, he arrived at the most opportune moment to save Lin Shu. The dragon, small compared to the bear, pounced on him and hit him so hard that he staggered, after which the Quilun hit the bear in the face with his tail, which caused his life energy to decrease. In the end, the dragon decided to use his own tactic, the flight of an angry crow. This tactic pinned the bear to the ground, allowing the Quilun to move closer to victory. In the end, the dragon was able to defeat the enemy because it was too heavy. And now the Quilun, proud of himself, was already sitting on the huge monster that he had just destroyed. Lin Shu remembered how the dragon had fallen on him and realized that he was very lucky that it hadn't crushed him as hard as it had that bear. After his victory, the Quilun jumped off the monster, after which he turned to him and licked his lips very appetizingly. Thus, thanks to devouring, the monster received evolution points and became stronger. The guy received the ability to project power. Quilun continued to improve through devouring. After some time, the system announced that the Quilun had successfully devoured the short-faced bear, for which it received evolution points. Looking at the statistics, Lin Shu was annoyed that the monster only got 1 or 2 points per bite. But soon only bones remained of the bear, and the contented Quilun lay nearby and rested. Lin Shu, watch all this, asked the system to calculate the total points for this bear. The system responded that this time a total of 19 evolution points were received, and they could be spent on developing the monster, which the guy did with a dissatisfied look, since the points were too few in his opinion. As soon as Lin Shu agreed to improve his pet, a golden light appeared around him just like the first time. Apparently, even in the secret realms, spiritual energy does not exist everywhere. Relying on eating prehistoric creatures obviously won't get them very far, so the guy asked the system to run the radar again. Lin Shu, realizing that the monster had only improved slightly, decided to find something with a stronger spiritual energy content. Eventually, he found what he was looking for, namely the presence of a large glow. Then Lin Shu turned to the Quilun and said that he would take him to a place where he could eat a lot of meat, which greatly encouraged the dragon. The guy understood that the radar showed that the distance to the target was quite decent, but with the help of the Quilun, it was possible to overcome it quickly enough, which was surprising for its size. Lin Shu then told the Quilun to stop, noticing strange dots around them. The monster braked sharply, as if it sensed something. Now the guy was also very wary, looking into the dense forest thicket. And it was not in vain, because from the thicket, many pairs of red eyes looked at them. Moreover, these strange creatures surrounded them. Lin Shu immediately turned to the system and asked what they should do this time. The system replied that the dog in front of them was a mutant, weighing 400 kilograms and 1 meter tall. This dog-like creature has keen senses and a sense of ultrasonic waves. It has short forelimbs and long hind limbs, moves in packs, and has highly developed teeth. Looking at the monsters, Lin Shu calmly noted that they were not at all fleshy, but at least the Quilun would be able to sharpen its teeth, after which the guy said that these stupid monsters could come up to them, since they saw them as their lunch, and show what they could do. This further angered the strange creatures, who opened their mouths and attacked the Quilun. There were too many of them, and they were coming from all sides. But this was no obstacle for the dragon, whose jaws were too powerful and whose skin was too thick. He began to devour the mutant dogs one after another, receiving 500 evolution points for each. This made Lin Shu very happy, as he realized that the reward for 1 mutant dog was higher than for 26 short-faced bears, which was surprising since these dogs looked very skinny. Then the boy commanded the Quilun to attack and eat until his stomach gave out, so that he would turn into an adult in 1 meal. The monster didn't need to be told again and immediately pounced on his enemies. He dealt with them one after another, which his master, who had been sitting on his neck the whole time, watched very attentively and with satisfaction. He watched the score rise, reaching 2502 in the blink of an eye, meaning that a rich result awaited them. Lin Shu immediately ordered the system to spend all the points on cultivating the Quilun, which then began to grow greatly, and its physique was increased. Because of these strange modifications, Lin Shu did not fall off the monster, but was able to hold on. The Quilun was now 1.8 meters tall and weighed 1.4 tons. The guy happily noted that after devouring several dogs, the progress reached 50%. If his Quilun managed to devour them all, Lin Shu would definitely be able to obtain the power projection, and that would already be a worthy result for the first visit to the secret realm. Among all the mutant dogs, one larger white dog appeared, who, apparently, was the leader of the pack. It was as if he gave a command to all the other dogs, who bared their teeth and turned towards the dragon and his master. This made Lin Shu very wary, as he realized that the leader had given his pack a command, and he felt as if the dog's gaze had changed. Suddenly, one of the dogs jumped out from the crowd, as if flying above the dragon, heading straight for Lin Shu. The guy was scared, not understanding why these dogs chose him to attack. But Quilun did not want to let his owner be offended and began to defend him, trying to push the dog away with his tail. Because of this, the dog grabbed the Quilun and was even able to injure him. This impressed the guy very much, and his face began to look worried, as his monster, without thinking about his own safety, protected him. But this was not the end of the problem, as the mutant dogs now attacked Lin Shu one after another. Most likely it was an order from the leader, who decided to use the guy to limit the actions of the Quilun. Lin Shu knew that this couldn't go on, and he couldn't allow himself to continue to hurt his monster. The mutant dogs might only be E rank, but their fangs could easily bite through a Quilun's shell. If they finally become bold and rush in a pack, it will have tragic consequences. This upset the guy, as there was only 30% left to complete the second system task. Only it was obvious that these stupid dogs did not want to give him such an opportunity. The guy thought that all this was incredibly banal, because wherever he went, the same thing happened everywhere. But, for example, oppression due to position. For example, these foolish classmates who bully the weak but back down from the strong. But they were wrong about one thing. Lin Shu might be a weakling without any awakened abilities, but they wouldn't be able to get the upper hand over the guy. Now he and the Quilun must become one and come up with a plan. Then he turned to his monster, putting his hand on its snout and pointing it towards one of the trees so that it would find any way to get to it. The monster understood the command and decided to carry it out. Thus the owner and his Quilun began to act as one, taking care of each other, unlike that time with the bear. Lin Shu's plan was a bit risky, but he still decided to give it a try, and he and the Quilun headed towards the tree while many mutant dogs were chasing after them. At the same time, the Quilun would not be constrained by the owner's protection, and would be able to roam freely, like last time with the bear. The guy was sure that it would not take much time for this glutton to get a promotion. The only thing Lin Shu wasn't sure about was how long he himself could hold out when surrounded by mutant dogs, but it was too late to think about that since they had already reached the desired location. The boy looked at the tree and remembered that at school he often had fun on the horizontal bars, so now such a height should not cause him any problems. After which, Lin Shu jumped high into the air, pushing off from the monster to reach the tree branch. Quilin didn't want to leave her master and snorted in displeasure when he left him. But Lin Shu, hanging on the branch, called the monster stupid and told it to go eat instead of sticking to him. At this time, the mutant dogs were already getting close to the tree, and the dragon realized what he needed to do. Lin Shu, realizing that he was bait, called all the dogs to him, but they could not pass through the Quilun. But suddenly there were so many of them that some of them reached the tree. The guy immediately stopped being so brave and grabbed the tree harder, because he didn't expect that so many monsters could appear in one moment, and they did not waste time and began to shake the tree, hitting it. Because of this, Lin Shu couldn't hold on for long and began to fall. During the fall, he called the system and asked it to use all the evolution points he had acquired. But the guy forgot that he had already spent all these points on developing the monster, so the system couldn't help him in any way, and he simply fell to the ground. All the mutant dogs immediately rushed towards him to attack. One of them was already very close, and Lin Shu thought that he would have to fight now. He understood that the forces were not equal, but he still rushed at the monsters in response. But before Lin Shu could even figure it out, red lightning appeared in front of him, pushing the monsters away from him. The impacts were so strong that many clouds of dust formed around. The guy didn't understand what happened and stared at his hand from which the power emanated. His hand deformed into a huge paw, meaning that he had gained the power of a monster. He began to remember what happened to him during the fall, because he understood that he did not have time to use all the evolution points, and that if he fell, these dogs would tear him to pieces. It turned out that during this time the Quilin had collected more points, its height had reached 4 meters, and its weight 3.5 tons, which meant that the monster had reached the adult stage. The guy asked the system to work faster, because he has an emergency situation here now. Namely, he wanted to get a reward for the second system task. The system issued a power projection reward, the use of which allowed one to merge with the projection of a monster located in the carrier's space and obtain 30% of all its attributes for a certain period of time. The guy also received a projection tube, which appeared after the materialization of the Quilin egg and was unusually simple and easy to use according to the system. First of all, the wearer needs to place the end of it on his eye. Next, using the rotation mechanism, find the projection of the desired monster. And finally, press the button to produce the projection. As Lin Shu fell to the ground, he began to object and say that it was not easy and convenient, as there were too many unnecessary actions to perform with this ability. It all looked like the system was deliberately trying to harm the guy. But, at the moment of falling, he accidentally pressed the button, selecting the monster in the projection tube. It immediately activated, thanks to which the guy received 30% of the power of the pendant he chose at random. But it was this very power that helped him escape the monster's bite. It was at that moment when the dog approached him that his hand was modified. The aggression coming from Lin Shu, who was charging at the monster in response, allowed him to increase the force of his strike, allowing him to pick up a dry tree and throw it straight at the monster. Only then did he look at his hand and notice that it no longer looked like his hand, but more like the hand of a monster. This gave the guy confidence, and he looked mockingly at the mutant dogs who still considered him a weakling. "Put your new hand on the tree," Lin Shu added. "Don't think of him as so weak, and if they still think so, then it's time to put them in their place." And with one squeeze of his hand, Lin Shu was able to claw his way into the tree bark. And then he tore it out by the roots and shouted that he was no longer a mediocrity, which was very good news for him. After the guy lifted the tree above himself, he threw it straight towards the monsters. They got scared and started running back so that the tree wouldn't hit them. The agility of the monsters surprised Lin Shu, who realized that he would probably have to go into direct confrontation. He then took a fighting stance, directly facing the monsters who were looking at him. But then heavy footsteps were heard, and they were clearly not the footsteps of dogs. Right behind the monsters, a huge figure of a Quilun appeared, which made the enemies hesitate. Monsters in one go with his mouth and lifted them above himself. The monster received another 500 evolution points for each dog for this devouring, after which the monster stared at its owner with burning eyes. The guy himself did not expect to see such a huge Quilun, who was already at the adult stage of his state and had a blood heritage of the tyrant level. This was the very pace worthy of Pangu monsters. The monster stared at Lin Shu, who said with satisfaction that he had fulfilled everything he had promised, namely providing his pet with a feast. In response to this, Quilun released a pair of his nostrils as if he was angry. But it turned out that in this way, he was simply moving away from a difficult battle, after which he again wanted to get closer to his master. Suddenly, the monster placed its huge paw on Lin Shu's shoulder, which surprised him greatly. But what surprised the guy even more was that the monster itself put him on its neck. And suddenly Lin Shu heard a voice asking him why he had left him without permission. This greatly frightened the guy, who began to turn around and look for the source of this voice. And then he looked into the eyes of the Quilun, after which he again heard the voice saying that it was too dangerous to leave him. Then the boy realized that it was his monster speaking. But he didn't manage to stay in a state of shock for long, because the system came out and said that there was nothing surprising about this, since the Pangu monsters had dominated the blue star for hundreds of millions of years. Therefore, they certainly were not a bunch of brainless primitive creatures, and during their long existence they developed intelligence, so it is not difficult for them to master human language. Suddenly the Quilun told Lin Shu once again that he was weak, so he couldn't take any risks. But the boy objected, saying that the monster itself had recently used him as bait to capture a huge bear. Quilun replied with displeasure that this was something completely different, since he was very strong and had everything under control. Lin Shu got angry and said that he always had everything under control too. Besides, if it weren't for his prompt decisions, it was possible that that pack of dogs would have torn them to shreds. Quilong looked at Lin Shu with concern, who in turn was surprised to realize that this monster was actually worried about him. Then the guy decided to calm down and change the subject, saying that, in any case, this was their first joint trip to the Secret Kingdom, which, moreover, was quite successful. Now it was time for them to return quickly. Moreover, before the night ends, we need to return Lin Yu's emblem, which, by the way, has completely disappeared. Lin Shu began to think where he could have lost it. Perhaps it was when he jumped on the tree or fell from it. Turning to the monster, the guy said that they needed to return the emblem, otherwise they would not be able to leave the Secret Kingdom. After some time, Lin Shu fell into despair as he combed the entire place where they had fought but still could not find the emblem. Here the Quilun smelled a strange odor, not like the smell of dogs, but the guy replied that he knew about birds that steal shiny things and put them in their nests, but he had never heard of dogs doing such a thing. But suddenly, Lin Shu also smelled a strange odor. Most likely it was due to the projection of power that was able to enhance his sense of smell, but what was even stranger was that he smelled the mutated dogs and the scent of Su Ling Yu. Then the friends decided to follow the smell to check what was there. Having lifted up the small earthen slabs, the Quilun looked down together with his master, who was glad that the pendant had really been found and was located right here. But judging by the appearance of the little mutant dogs, they did not want to give them the emblem so easily. These little dogs of the E level weighed 130 kilograms and were 30 centimeters tall. They had highly developed fangs and carnivorous teeth with high bite force. The guy thought that the small mutant dogs were the babies of mutant dogs, but the system said that you have a very bad memory for faces because these creatures are completely different. Small mutant dogs are ordinary short dogs, but they, under the influence of spiritual energy, evolved into small-sized monsters. They are small in size, but given their warlike nature, when they gather in a group, they will attack their enemy without any ceremony. What the little dog started doing was attacking the Quilun, but their bites weren't even worth his attention. And with one movement of his leg, he threw the little dogs back. And then he looked at them fiercely, licking his lips appetizingly. But suddenly Lin Shu appeared between the dogs and the dragon, asking the Quilun not to eat them, but to leave them to him, as he wanted to try to use taming on them. At that moment, the main character did not even realize that 45 minutes ago, a light came on in one window of a huge multi-story building, and a pensive girl was standing on the balcony of this apartment. Lin Yu wondered how the thief managed to sneak into the 45th floor terrace but leave so loudly. Could it be that the awakened Kiman system, which was aimed at physical enhancement, had climbed up the wall here? But it is unlikely that a person could leave such a huge dent on the ground, which looks very strange. Well, then she noticed a piece of torn fabric hanging on the balcony ledge, and from the picture of bananas she realized that it was Lin Shu. It would be highly unlikely that another person would have had such dubious taste, which means that what she felt today during her daytime rounds was not her imagination. When Lin Yu was in the school courtyard, she felt like she sensed the aura of a monster for a moment. But as she followed the direction of the aura, she came across a gang of students causing trouble in the classroom. After the incident, she took their student records to check their backgrounds, and it turned out that they all had standard abilities. But if we assume that the feeling at that moment was not mistaken, then Lin Shu, who had not officially awakened, is the most suspicious. In these interesting thoughts, the girl went down to the first floor. It seemed to her that what she was thinking about was impossible. There had never been a time when the equipment that detected the awakened and their abilities had malfunctioned, and she had never heard of an ability that could control monsters, only the mind control ability of the Lurin system. Besides, if we assume that Lin Shu really is hiding his abilities, then why did he allow himself to be bullied like that during the day and not respond to his bullies? Lin Yu didn't know what to think when she went outside to get some fresh air. However, one thing is certain. If Lin Shu had awakened some ability that allowed him to control monsters, it would explain the series of strange events that had happened today. But then new questions arose in the girl's head, namely, why did this strange guy break into her house in the middle of the night, and how did he even know where she lived? Then Lin Yu received a notification on her phone and looked at the screen. It stated that a red-level situation had occurred in the E-rank secret realm, and the notification itself came from the control center of the A86 secret realm, which in itself was very strange. No one yet knew that at that very moment, in the territory of the secret kingdom A86, Lin Shu fenced off the small dogs from the Qilun so that he would not rush to eat them. The monster was upset and said that the guy was not keeping his word, standing between him and the food for the third time. But Lin Shu replied that their radar dots were no bigger than the giant bears, meaning that if the Qilun ate them, it would hardly gain 10 evolution points, so it would be better to leave them to him. The guy wanted to try using taming on them, and to activate this ability, the target's level must not exceed the level of his monster of fate. When the boy received the ability to tame, he wondered if there were monsters weaker than this dragon. But now only 2 hours had passed, and he had already grown to such enormous sizes that, in fact, the potential of this glutton seemed limitless. But then, unexpectedly, the small dogs pounced on Lin Shu, and one of them bit him on the hand. But it didn't hurt at all, since his arm was still modified, which turned out to be very useful, but the system decided to remind him that the ability's time limit would soon end. If the boy still doesn't get rid of the attacks of the small mutant dogs after reaching the limit, he will suffer serious injuries. This scared Lin Shu, who asked the Qilin for help, but he only grinned and told him to deal with his pets himself. Then Lin Shu remembered that he was just about to subjugate them. The little dogs had already surrounded the boy from all sides when he decided to begin. The arm had almost returned to its normal state, but Lin Shu had managed to place the Lin Yu emblem on the monster's neck. At that very moment, the dog's gaze changed and became kinder and more playful. She, to the surprise of her fellows, jumped away from Lin Shu. The other dogs looked at their friend who had suddenly changed sides and did not understand why he was barking at them. Lin Shu realized that this little dog was angry that his fellow dogs were biting him. That's to be expected from the taming ability and the new loyal sidekick. Soon the boy tamed all 3 mutant dogs and began to have fun with them, while the Qilin watched this with boredom. Then the system popped up and said that given the current level of the ability, the total number of monsters that the wearer can tame is 5, and at the moment there are already 4 under his control. The guy's mood immediately changed to aggressive, since the system hadn't told him this before, because if he had a limit of 5 monsters, then why did he spend 3 slots on small mutant dogs? The system responded that there was a solution to this problem, and said that one needed to obtain the monster's crystal core, and the reward for this would be the system ability Monster Space. Dissatisfied with the next task, Lin Shu replied that although it was easy in words, crystal cores were not lying around at every step, and in order to incubate the Qilun, the guy even had to sacrifice his father's metal. But now there was no time to think about this, since it was necessary to quickly return and give Lin Yu her emblem before she discovered it was missing. Lin Shu picked up the little dog and, smiling, decided to remove the emblem from it. The dog didn't want to part with his owner and licked him on the nose, after which all 3 puppies pounced on the guy and began to lick him under the mocking gaze of the Qilin, who said that the guy could not cope even with these 3 little monsters, but wanted even more. But Lin Shu, who could do without his comments, decided to quickly deal with the problem. Eventually, the dog jumped back and the emblem flew down. Hitting the ground, she began to roll further and further. Eventually, the guy caught up with her and decided to pick her up, but it turned out that this pendant could open. This emblem was created as a pendant with a photo inside. Imagine the boy's surprise when he realized that this photograph depicted his father. And the biggest question was, what does his father's photo do with Su Ling Yu's emblem? Could she really be his sister? The guy immediately remembered his mother, namely the moment when she was busy eating shashlik. After which, he remembered Su Ling Yu, who was currently busy exploring the secret realm. Lin Shu already thought that he had accidentally discovered the truth about his father's disappearance. But then the phone in his pocket suddenly vibrated, interrupting the guy's thoughts. He wondered who could be calling him at such a time, but an unknown number appeared on the screen. Picking up the phone, Lin Shu heard Lin Yu's displeased voice, accusing him of sneaking into her house and stealing her guild emblem. Lin Shu decided to pretend that he didn't understand what the girl was talking about, but he thought with annoyance that she had discovered the loss too quickly. Lin Yu told the guy to be more relaxed, because as far as she knew, he was currently in the Secret Kingdom A86. The Secret Kingdom's control center had just received an urgent notice. 15 minutes ago, a reaction corresponding to a monster above the second grade was detected in the secret realm of A68. Hearing this, Lin Shu pretended to be very surprised. But the girl continued and said that since this kingdom belongs to Yerang, the weight of the monsters living there does not exceed a ton, which is why it is used as a place for the practice of awakened blood-freezing stage. The strength of monsters above the second grade is at least equal to the stage of spiritual keys, so they are extremely dangerous. But then Lin Shu interrupted Lin Yu's story and decided to recall what happened 10 minutes ago. And 10 minutes ago, his Quillen was just fighting with mutant dogs, after which he spent 25 on 2 evolution points to increase his physique. The guy realized that it was all about his dragon and silently stared at it while the girl on the phone asked if Lin Shu was even listening to her. The guy realized that the monster that Lin Yu was talking about was his Quilun, because he was so carried away by raising its level that he completely forgot that in the secret kingdoms there is strict supervision over the size of monsters. For his own well-being, he now needed to get out of here before the scale of the problem escalated even further, so he told the girl that he didn't understand at all what this serious situation had to do with him. But Lin Yu replied that he would soon understand everything, because the secret kingdoms are not limited to just an online access control system. They are even more famous for their security and prevention system. According to her calculations, the Auxiliary Detachment of the Counteraction Bureau has already arrived at the scene and is currently cordoning off the area and conducting an inspection. The information about the Countermeasure Bureau had scared Lin Shu very much, who really didn't want to get caught in the crossfire, but now it had become a huge problem. The girl said that the guy's reaction to the situation was more correct, since he had finally begun to realize the seriousness of his situation. The emergency message had already been sent out, so now he was on his own. Then the girl added that the guy should contact her if he and his friend managed to get out of the secret kingdom safely, and that he should not forget that she still had not paid him for stealing the emblem. If the opportunity arises, it will be necessary to meet her and talk, since the photo of the guy's father raises many questions for Lin Shu. However, their first priority is to get out of here. Quilin asked the owner what was going on while he opened the parameters of his monster. Then, looking at the radar, Lin Shu said that the situation was quite dangerous, and the presence of the monster had disturbed the Countermeasure Bureau. They were now raiding to try to capture them. Quilin took this information positively, as he thought that they could all be eaten. But Lin Shu was not satisfied with the monster's thoughts, which were only about food, because they needed to figure out how to hide from pursuit. Moreover, the dragon should not forget that he is their main target. Then the mutant dogs suddenly returned, and one of them bit the guy on the leg of his pants, as if trying to warn him. Soon, 3 dogs appeared, all running towards Lin Shu, who didn't understand what was happening. Then the guy stayed on the Quilin, deciding to find out what the dogs wanted to tell him, because the dragon could understand them. Quilin replied that the dogs were telling him that there was a large and deep underground cave ahead that he could hide in. The idea of burrowing into the ground to hide from people made the boy think that he was turning into a monster himself. Lin Shu then decided to ask the system if going underground could also hide the spiritual energy coming from the monsters, to which it replied that the radar was unable to detect these small mutant dogs that were in a small depression. The guy happily thought that he could not have imagined that at a critical moment these little dogs would help them out so much, and in this case, he decided to do just that, since there were no other options. Lin Shu had previously noted that the landscape here was rather strange, meaning that there might be underground caves beneath these rocks. Quilun had translated what the dogs had said, that there were much larger caves ahead that could accommodate them. Finally, they arrived at the place, after which the dragon stopped and its owner jumped to the ground. Looking into the huge hole in the ground, the guy noticed that he didn't really want to go down there. Then the Quilin said that he could go down there himself and ordered the guy to wait for him on the surface. The dragon and the 3 mutant dogs jumped down without even waiting for Lin Shu's approval. This entrance to the cave looked like an underground slide that you had to slide down. After the monsters left, Lin Shu ordered the system to check if this cave was really able to hide their spiritual energy. Looking at the radar, the guy realized that, having found himself in the cave, the response to the spiritual energy of the monsters really weakened, but this was not enough to completely hide the Quilun. Having jumped down after the monsters, the guy decided to tell the Quilun about this information so that he would go deeper. The dragon immediately felt that someone was approaching him. He turned back angrily and asked the owner why he had come down after him. Lin Shu replied that the dragon had not hidden well enough, and he had come down to say so. This cave is really vast and also hides spiritual energy, which means they are very lucky, but the dragon said that it is too early to rejoice. Touching the wall, he noticed traces of digging. This means that someone dug this huge and intricate group of underground tunnels, and their thickness is another cause for concern. The Quilin also added that the animals dig underground tunnels that are much larger than their own size, and the guy added that there could be a huge animal here. He then turned to the dragon and said that this was an E-rank secret realm, and if there were really big monsters here, it would have been discovered long ago. But then he remembered that this was still a cave that hid spiritual energy. Quilin confirmed the guy's fears, adding that this was exactly why they came down here. Then suddenly a strange smell reached the monster's nose. The guy asked what was going on, but the monster replied that there was something bad ahead. At that very moment, the Quilun and the 3 dogs took off and ran into the depths of the cave, and Lin Shu had no choice but to run after them. When he finally caught up with the monsters, he stared ahead to see where they were going in such a hurry. He was surprised to see a huge amount of animal carcasses and bones piled up in front of him. It was literally a mountain of animal remains, and the lower the remains were, the earlier the animal had been there. Quilin stared at the meat with gusto, but Lin Shu said that if he continued to eat, no cave would be able to hide him. At this point, the floor in the cave began to shake, which frightened Lin Shu greatly. A huge monster suddenly emerged from this pile of bones. It was very vile and so huge that its mouth could easily fit everyone present. It was a fancy wild beast at the juvenile stage and the leader level of beasts. It was 8 meters tall and weighed 5.4 tons. This wild beast of the deepest antiquity, having a lazy and greedy natural character, very rarely came to the surface, preferred to dig huge holes in the damp clay soil, and wait until the prey itself came into its hands. Looking at all this bacchanalia, the guy couldn't understand where they had ended up. Here they heard the barking of dogs, which was already familiar to them. Lin Shu took a closer look and recognized the very dogs that had attacked them. They tried to escape from the monster's lair and save their leader. At this point, the huge white dog turned around and attacked Lin Shu with his entire pack, who thought that it seemed like these dogs had mistakenly decided that they were the ones who had set a trap for them. Quilin immediately became aggressive and began to growl at the leader, while Lin Shu thought about how these dogs could accidentally fall here while they were running away. After all, they were just on the surface. The boy then turned to his dragon and said that now was not the time to argue, and also pointed out to the leader that there was danger behind him. The beast fancy opened his huge hungry mouth, ready to grab all the dogs at once. The next second he was able to make his wish come true. There was no trace left of the entire small pack of dogs. Thus, 3 mutant dogs disappeared, who did not even have a chance to win, so now the guy could only count on the Quilun. Here the huge monster looked suspiciously at the dragon, after which he began to quickly move towards Quilin and Lin Shu. The frightened boy thought that this was the very same monster that was above the 5th grade.